In this section we will deal with items. Items are used to collect information from a computer by different means. Let's start by adding a new item to the server Fry. As an example, let's measure the number of processor context switches per second. The host is the name of the host this item is related to. The name is the human-readable description of this item. Let's use context switches per second. The type tells how this information is collected. It comes from the Zabbix agent, but it could also be SNMP or one of the various other methods. If possible, you should always run a Zabbix agent on the monitored server, because that gives you access to most of the system's parameters using a consistent way. The difference between Zabbix agent and Zabbix agent active concerns the direction that data is transferred. Using the standard passive way, your Zabbix server will connect to the Zabbix agent running on the host and get the information. Instead, when you use the active way, the Zabbix agent on the host will ask the Zabbix server every 2 minutes what items it expects from this agent. It will then automatically send that information actively to the server at the desired interval. The active way is more CPU-friendly and is therefore preferred. The key depends on the type. If you choose Zabbix agent as a type, then you have to use the appropriate key that the Zabbix agent understands. Let's take a look at the Zabbix documentation about the items provided by the Zabbix agent. The key of our desired item is called system.cpu.switches. The host interface can be one of the interfaces that you defined at the host. The type of information is numeric unsigned because the context switches are an integer number that always increases and is never negative. Always make sure that you select the correct type here. For example, if you monitor the CPU load, which is usually a float number, you would get an error if you define the type as numeric integer. The data type refers to the numeral system. Leave it to decimal unless you intend to deal with octal, binary, or hexadecimal values. The unit specifies the measuring unit of the item, like kilometers, degrees Celsius, seconds, kilobytes, or bits per second. If you put an uppercase B here, that stands for bytes, then Zabbix acts pretty smart and uses powers of 2 correctly to designate kilobytes or megabytes. I will just use switches per sec. The custom multiplier gets important if you need to convert your data by multiplying it with a factor. A common case is a network interface card that counts bytes instead of bits. To get proper readings of bits per second or kilobits per second, you would have to multiply all incoming data by factor 8. We don't need to multiply our incoming data, so I leave this box unticked. The update interval specifies how often this item will get collected. This item should be collected once a minute, so I'm entering 60. Keep in mind that Zabbix will store all collected information in the database, so this item will create a new row in the database every minute. That might not seem much, but it will add up quickly if you have many servers with dozens of items each. So consider setting this interval higher to keep the load on the Zabbix server low. The flexible interval customizes the update interval during certain time periods. Imagine that you want more accurate readings in the morning, then you could specify an interval of 30 seconds every day between 8 and 10 AM. 1 to 7 stands for Monday to Sunday here. The Keep History and Keep Trends sets how much historic information is kept in the database. As I mentioned, Zabbix will add new readings to the database. The history refers to all gathered data, so Keep History sets the time and days after which Zabbix will delete old items. The trends, in turn, refer to hourly averaged values. After every full hour, Zabbix will compute an average value and store it as a trend value in the database. Keep Trends is usually a higher value because it's taking less space in your database to store a value once an hour rather than every minute. Let's use 3 and 30 so that the minute values are removed after 3 days and the hourly averages are removed after a month. The store value option can make Zabbix preprocess the data even more. For absolute values like your server room's temperature, the as-is option is the best. But we are interested in the change of the count of context switches over time. Note that the agent just returns the absolute number of context switches, not the switches per second. To make Zabbix compute that change per second, I set this to delta speed per second. Zabbix will automatically compute the time distance between two readings and compute the change per second correctly. If you choose delta simple change, then Zabbix would not take the time into account and just return the difference of two readings. Show value again is purely for humans. If the return value has a special meaning, then you can define so-called value mappings to map these boring numbers into speaking text strings. When I click on this link, I'm taken to the section where I can manage these mappings. For example, the APC battery replacement status would show OK if the item returned would be 3. You can add your own mappings here. The application is the group of items. You can freely invent your own applications if you have special requirements or just choose an existing application. Our item concerns the operating system, so I'm choosing OS. The populates host inventory field makes Zabbix fill out certain of the predefined fields in the host inventory. It's used for fixed information like hardware information. We don't use it here. The description again helps us humans understand this item better. I'm adding number of context switches on the operating system. And of course, we want to monitor this item, so the status is enabled. You may get an error when you try to reproduce this telling you that the item exists already. The system.cpu.switches item is also provided by the default Linux template. That concludes this video. You have learned about the many settings of an item and what they are used for. In the next video, I will show you how to keep track of the many items that you will likely have to deal with.